Hello. I'm Harry Shyket. I'm a front-end developer at Yale ITS for Campus Community Technologies. I just want to talk to you today about the future of Drupal and content delivery. This is something that's been kind of, I've been exploring is sort of where the different pieces of content are going to go with Drupal in terms of what are the different distribution platforms and what are the endpoints. So I kind of wanted to just review. Let's take a look back into, I guess, a little bit of web development history. So I guess when we first started building websites, as I'm sure many of you remember, you'd open up your notepad and you'd write some HTML tags and then throw it up. Usually on your machine, and then it would render as a website, right? Fairly simple. We added some CSS, some JavaScript to help the layout, some basic functionality put together. It wasn't too difficult to really get up and running on the web. And then we'd save them, in static files, and we'd put them up on a file server. And if anybody remembers Elsinore from Yale, that was the original file server that was finally retired this year. But that's exactly what it did. You would just throw up your files. It was very easy. You'd FTP in and just dump them right there, and your website was ready to go. And this is from June 2000 off of archive.org. And similar concept, I'm guessing, they opened up Notepad or Dreamweaver maybe, put together a table-based layout, and this was sort of the front end for Yale University. So then what if we needed a little extra functionality? So HTML, JavaScript, CSS could do quite a bit, but couldn't do really all that much in terms of interactive functionality. So what if you wanted a contact form, or you wanted to read rows out of a database or a file or anything? It couldn't really do that from your server. It would be slightly difficult. So there was scripting languages developed such as Perl and PHP that would allow us to do this. So usually you would say, okay, I need a contact form. You start writing a little PHP or Perl, and then you throw it up and then on the web, and then it would just sort of run and collect your data or read data out of the database. And that added a little interactivity to it. But while the HTML was not that much of a stretch to learn, it wasn't that difficult. Doing actual programming was a little bit more complex, and so there's a lot of people would code stuff. Amateur coders, which were security risks, would come up too. But any of those usually functionality would take a little while to implement. And you usually had to hire a vendor to do it, or as we've seen at Yale, a lot of times a grad student would do it. Would do something for a department and then leave, and they were sort of stuck with, what do we do now? So the birth of the content management system. So, well, actually, they have been around for quite a while. If anyone remembers, like Tripod, GeoCities, building websites early on. Even Dreamweaver, I guess, technically with its functionality, might be considered a content management system. And then, but as they sort of matured, we had CMS platforms like Drupal, WordPress, that allowed us to build up a lot of these sites fairly quickly without really having to know a lot of HTML or PHP or database querying. And there was modules to add functionality in easily. So you would put in a module, and then you get the functionality, ideally, that you desired. And there's quite a few of them to choose from. So while you did have to put in a little more time up front to getting it set up, it was a little bit more maintainable than just static HTML files. And then back then, too, we really only had to worry about desktop computers. So when we were building our layouts for websites, we'd have, we'd talk about monitor resolution, Windows versus Mac. And there's sort of pixel perfect, these gorgeous, I guess, designs of websites. You try to outcompete who had a better looking website. Kind of miss those days; those were fun. But but so and we would worry. Okay, does it work in IE5, IE6, IE7, Firefox, Safari if you were targeting Mac people? So it was a simpler time. And then if you needed a little extra functionality, you would go into Flash, and Flash would give you some interactivity. It could connect out to websites. So it was a little tricky getting it to do that. And then came the iPhone in around 2007. And so now we went from talking about how does it look on a desktop to how does it look on the mobile phone. And immediately, I think, no one was really ready for the iPhone browser. There was not a lot of sites that were really optimized for it. There was people creating apps, which also gave you interactive content. But it was still a fairly new technology, and it was proving a little bit challenging. I think it really sort of made us look and say, okay, how do we do this now? And then we had responsive design, so that was, I guess, sort of one of the answers to it. There were some others that would do a mobile separate website where you'd have the m dot whatever domain name, but I think that sort of disappeared because it was kind of difficult to maintain two websites, so that it became a little tricky. And you usually had to detect whether the device was a mobile phone or not, and that started to blur a little bit. So responsive design allowed us to create sites that would sort of go from this large wide screen all the way down to a little phone. So this is from June 2016, so about 16 years later, and as we could see, you have the desktop and the mobile site for Yale.edu. So then the question is, what's next, right? So we have desktop, we have mobile. I don't think it's over there. I think there's a lot that's coming. And there's actually a lot of internet-connected devices, a lot of times IoT devices. Your refrigerators can have Wi-Fi, VR headsets, sensors. So there's quite a bit that is coming along. And so the question is, well, how do we develop for each of these, right? What are we going to do? Do we have different layouts for each? How do they consume data? So one of the things that I want to talk about was something called Headless Drupal. But really the concept is having each platform be able to accept data from Drupal or from anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be Drupal. And I think Drupal is starting to realize this, starting with Drupal 8, to say, listen, we can no longer do these static, it works in this browser website anymore. It's just, that's not where it's going. We have to look out and say, where are the devices, right? Where is the endpoint even for this content to appear? So this is going to allow us everything from single page applications where you just load it once and then it runs through the browser. Mobile apps, VR headsets, refrigerator, kind of, anything that's really has the ability to consume data. And I think it's really, important to start thinking about this now because it is coming, and while we may not be on the bleeding edge or want to be, we should be aware that, these things will consume the data. So just a couple examples of Headless Drupal. I think CTL has a big screen TV outside. I know School of Management does. But if there's some sort of large screen display you have, how do you power that content, right? Where should that content come from? And you potentially use Drupal to power the content that's in there. Or if let's say you're a college and you have students that have your mobile app for your department, wouldn't it be nice to enter it in Drupal and say there's a speaker coming up and have a notification pop up that's saying this speaker is going to be here on this day at this time, right? And so you would just enter it once and it would be able to be pushed out to all these different areas that you would need it to go. Or you've captured 360-degree image of a historic site, then you can use Drupal to power the annotation data that's sort of around that. So I don't think technically I'm on the YaleSites team, but I don't want to speak for them, but it seems to be the direction that they are going. They want to be where the end user experiences are, and they want to sort of power them, right? So the content and the infrastructure that's there will power this. So I think, it's really important, and this is the reason for the camp, that, everyone understands how to build content in Drupal, how to get your site up and running so that when these new endpoints, new devices are up and running, your content is there ready to be pushed out to those platforms. We may still have to do work on the endpoints, but your content is there ready to be consumed. So I'll show a couple demos, but the other thing I want to do too is let's have a discussion about this. What do you see for the future? What are your ideas as well? So one of the things that actually sort of has brought me out to this was last year for the Peabody Museum, and I actually presented on this last year at Drupal Camp. They needed a kiosk for their that they bring out to their users, or to their visitors, I should say. So the point of the kiosk was they would have an object, and then the user would need to identify what that object was. They would go through a series of questions, and in the end, they would come out with what the object is. So I can probably quickly go through one. So you'd have an object, and you would say, yes, does it look like this? No. It would ask you a series of questions, all guiding you down to potentially a final answer. And so one of the things of building kiosks at the Peabody was I built them in the past, and unfortunately what would happen is they would have to do that old sort of thing where you have your web page and you click a link and it goes to another web page and you have to wait for it to load. And I think on a computer, a user browsing a website, that was fine, but we really wanted to, a quick responsive thing, because when you're visiting a kiosk, you only have a few minutes at most of a user's attention. So, I said, okay, well, I could build this purely in Drupal, but I was like, it's gonna, I could probably build some front-end framework, but it's still gonna probably be somewhat slow. So I said, okay, let me look at some front-end frameworks, JavaScript, and this is actually ReactJS, which is a front-end framework. And I said, this sounds interesting. It might be, it was quick, it was responsive. I could build it all in React and it will work great. The problem was that there was a content, right? So this was a yes or no tree. Remember like the choose your own adventure books? Anybody remember those back in the day? And so I was given a Word document with this tree, and I couldn't decipher it. It was just so confusing, and their intentions weren't very clear to me. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go into Drupal, and I'm going to build out the content in Drupal using Drupal content fields. And so all the pages for the content are here in Drupal. And then what happens is it's actually exposed with a view for that ReactJS app to consume, so that they were able to go in here, modify whatever sort of file they needed to, and then they can modify the content. So there would be, is it a question page, is it a final specimen page, and a yes or no tree, and then they would put all the content in, and then it would power this application, so that when they made a change, they didn't have to bother me. They would just make the change, and then the application would automatically be updated with their choices. So I think and this got me started thinking about, this is a kind of a great model for building out to other platforms. So, is this something that we can do for, mobile applications or VR headsets? So that's one of the things we're looking at right now with Drupal 8. And so I don't know if this has been previewed. Apologize, it's kind of difficult to see the second screen. But I'll show you an example of Drupal 8. And so I have my content that's here in this node, right? And now Drupal 8 makes it really easy to export JSON data, a lot easier than 7, which was what the ReactJS application was built in. And so, so we have this. I've made this sort of sample mobile app. It runs in an iOS simulator. Let's just what it does is it's just literally an image of the Yale logo and then pieces of text. And so this piece of text is actually being pulled from this Drupal site behind it, right? So it's pulling in the data and it's just displaying it out to the user. So let's go ahead and edit this data.
Monitor in front of you.
I don't. Oh.
Just over here.
Oh, thank you. I didn't see that. So does anybody have a sentence they want to type? Just so, it's a real magic trick. Anybody? No? No? Okay. So, my department's content. Okay. And then we'll save it. And then we're going to refresh the app. And there we go. And it pulled it in. So this is a mobile platform. This is actually built on something called React Native, which is a sort of analogous to the Kiosk application. But it lets you build native applications in JavaScript for both platforms, actually. iOS, Android, and if you really want Windows for the 5 people. But the point of this was that you can create your experiences in Drupal and then pull them in. And you'd have to get someone to work on the mobile app, but it is possible to power it in that way. And then the other thing that we're looking at is right now VR, virtual reality. So this was This is just a sample. This would actually work in a headset, and this is actually using React VR, which is again analogous to React Native, React.js. This would work on a headset, an Oculus Rift, or Samsung VR. And I'm sorry if I make anybody nauseous by doing this. But again, this content is powered here. Let's see if I refresh. Oh. And that's the content from our Drupal site that would now be powering your VR experience and potentially interacting, right? So if you had controls, you could click a button and then it would go off to the Drupal server or other endpoint server, have an interaction, then send you data back as well. And so, you know, if you want to see, this is my basement. So I created my own VR. What I did was I have just a Samsung S6 phone. I took a tripod and I took the head off a selfie stick, and I just, Google Street View app will actually let you take 360 photospheres. And it's not as great as like probably a $400,000 camera, as you can see right here, but it will allow you to take 360 photos. So, you know, this is something you can start doing. And ideally what in this case I would do is, although it's not created, here's my content. You could actually upload this endpoint image into Drupal and then have a front end that generates the equivalent JavaScript that's needed to render this experience. And so here, and here's sort of the data. So this kind of looks a little scary, but this is just JSON data, which is a data format that's powering all these experiences. I'm saying, you know, where's the body content right here, pull this out, and now I have my data in my whatever, you know, you can put it on a refrigerator if it's able to accept data and build apps as well. And then, so, okay. I think that's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions?
So for the previous kiosk,
Mm-hmm.
you use the views from Drupal?
So because it was a Drupal 7 site, I had to use views and a views JSON module to pull all that out. This actually was a REST UI module for Drupal 8, and it was able to easily format into JSON. So Drupal 8 is really, I think, has a good understanding of where this, you know, of where sort of endpoint data consumption is going.
So data should be much more compact than using views.
Yeah, well, it can be. You can configure how you want it. In this instance, I only have one node. I may need to use a view if I wanted to get multiple nodes, like I did in the Kiosk App. So for the Kiosk App, I had to use a view because what I did was, it's not pulling data every time I click a question. It's pulling data on actual page load. So it's saying, okay, get me all the data. And because I need a quick and powerful kiosk experience, I actually save the data locally to the browser in this instance. And then it runs off of that.
Did you notice any big difference in performance then?
No, I mean, well, the VR does take a little while to load because they're usually larger images. So it will take some time to get up, you know, bring the image down. Ideally, what you'd want to do is if you're using in the VR, you'd want to put the images onto an S3, which is Amazon's sort of data storage or image storage platform, file storage. That way, it could quickly come in, and then you're sort of up and running. But in terms of the data, I mean, I didn't see a difference in time-wise for generated view from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. But I haven't really tried Drupal 8 fully, you know, their system fully for pulling the data out. This is more of just a conceptual mock-up. So, I mean, oh, yeah.
Do you know if you could use Ajax for that awesome thing?
Mm-hmm.
So you would stay on the same page rather than on page.
So I probably should have defined single page applications. That's exactly what it does. So a single page application actually loads everything, all the pages, right? When I'm going through this kiosk, it never changes the actual page. Even though this URL changes, it's actually a hash. So this just understands that, oh, it's, you know, it's its own internal system. And when it pulls that data down, it's actually doing an Ajax call out to the server, to Drupal, and saying, hey, Drupal, I need this data. And then Drupal's compiling it and sending it back down. One thing I will show you, and so I really like the ReactJS native ecosystem. I've kind of really been pushing it, and the reason is I'm going to show you 3 code files. The first is, this is what the kiosk code looks like for the JavaScript, right? You have some functions in here, components, but the actual, and you don't have to understand this, the point of this is the native application code that's running this, right, which looks very similar, and this is the virtual reality code. And the purpose that I like this is, it's not the same code, but it's the same principles and pretty much very similar concepts for building these applications on 3 endpoints. So I've really been impressed with the way React works. I've built a couple applications in it, and it's really done what I need it to do. It's not perfect for everything. Like if you need a website indexed heavily by Google, there's a lot of work to get a single page application to do so. So that may not be ideal for it, but for getting out to these endpoint experiences, I think, this took me, because I understood this right here, which is like fetch, here, get my data from Drupal. I was able to just literally copy it over and get my data to Drupal, and now it works in a headset. So, anyone else? Any other questions or discussions? Like, what are some of your, I guess, thoughts about where do you want to see? What do you think? How difficult will it be to get this data to create the content? Fears, hopes, anything? So, okay. All right, well, I mean, for me, I think, this is going forward going to be the way that we power everything in terms of getting our data out. I don't think we're going to, the HTML page will still exist, but I think the way that we present data to others, especially, Internet of Devices, and, setting maybe even your thermostat, or your refrigerator to say, this is my shopping list, power it, through Drupal, create a content type, and then so as long as I think the important thing is let's understand Drupal, let's understand how the data is powered, and that's the reason why I think ITS is really pushing Drupal, is because it has this ability to do so, right? The other content management systems can, but I think if you join us with Drupal and continue on with us, this is kind of the direction that we're going, and that we're gonna at least try to help you get towards being able to create all these experiences. So.
I don't know if mine's a comment or a question. So I work in environmental health and safety, and 80% of our trainings are online trainings produced in Captivate or Storyline,
Okay.
which my predecessor generated Swift files for everything. So now we're having a lot of problems with browser. It's more browser than it is Drupal, not supporting Swift and Adobe Flash. And so I'm having to use the Amazon server for my content. Is there any, besides the flat clip page and the yes/no tree, is there any interactivity type stuff that could be built in Drupal along the lines of what I would need with multi-page interactive training?
Well, I mean, I think if you wanted to go the route of using something like this, right? Obviously, we could recreate this, have your content in Drupal, blow this away, and create a front end that's a little bit easier, to use. There is also the Drupal assessment module site, which is for training specifically, which is supported by ITS. But if you were to go this route with, we could still power the questions in with Drupal. It would be a question of building authentication, making sure that we know who the users are, who's taking the quizzes. But yeah, you could have quiz questions here that go through, and then you click yes, and then you either have your answer or you go on to the next question, however you want it to be built. And then that would make it portable if you needed to do it on other platforms. So, in EHS, you'd need them to put a headset on. You could power that content as well, with Drupal, because they have to interact with it in some sort of way. So, anyone else? No? Okay. Well, I mean, that's pretty much it. I hope everyone's excited as I am about this. And thank you.